Hello and welcome back to Inflection Point Conversations. I'm Michelle Obeda. I'm a 3D artist and the host of this podcast. I'll be chatting with different people who are experts in various CGI fields. Together, we'll take a deep dive into the disruptive topics that have reached an inflection point in the industry. If you're enjoying this podcast, please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe. You can also comment and give feedback. I'd love to hear from you and grow this amazing community. Today I'm talking with Nancy Kleppel, Anik Pearson, and Angelique Pierre, the three co-founders of Mentorship for Women in Architecture. Nancy is an independent consultant providing tactical and strategic marketing and business development services to architects, engineers, and a diverse group of AEC industry professionals. Anik opened her own practice in 2001, Anik Pearson Architects, which is 100% female-owned. Her firm's design team merges modern living concepts with a distinctive range of architectural and decorative styles and is drawing audiences in design, lifestyle, and professional circles. Angelique is a senior project architect at Anik Pearson Architect. She's managed many of the firm's largest residential projects, including some of the most complex apartment and townhouse renovations. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having us. Just a note, Angelique
Yeah.
worked at my firm for 11 years, but is now on her own. So Angelique, maybe you can say what you've been up to for the last few years.
Yeah. So as Anik mentioned, I was with her for 11 wonderful years, and I left in at the end of 2022 to start my own practice, BLKDR Architecture and Development. My focus is on sustainable architecture and development, but I have 15 years plus of high-end residential development and both interior and exterior detailing that has served me in what I'm doing now. So I won't monopolize the conversation about what I'm doing since we're here to talk about mentorship for women in architecture, but that's the proper update of my bio. Sorry we didn't get you the right one.
Oh, that's really great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think I read an out-of-date bio. That's really cool. Interesting to know as well. So how long have your practice been going for? You said like 4 years?
2 years. 2 years. It's
2 years,
a baby.
2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to note that even though Angelique's practice is new in the past 2 years, there is a continuous thread in which we have all been working together very closely, even though the nature of that work has shifted over the years.
I was going to start the conversation actually. How did you all meet? Yeah.
Well, I guess,
am
yeah.
happy to start. After having a firm for almost 20 years as a woman-led architecture firm in a man's field, primarily a male-dominated career, I felt invisible. And a friend of mine gave me Nancy's card and said, "You have to talk to this woman." And I called Nancy up, and she stepped into a role of kind of coaching, looking inward about who we are as a firm. And Angelique and I were both working in the firm at the time. It was a downturn in the economy, so it was just me and Angelique. And Nancy graciously interviewed us at our firm and worked with us to kind of understand who we were and be able to articulate the value of the work that we do and identify what our strengths are and who we would want to work with in a 5, 10, 15-year horizon. It was a really informative, powerful interview that kind of set us on our path. And I think, Angelique, that kind of set you on your path to finding independence.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you kind of invited me into that process because, obviously as the firm owner, you could have just done it on your own, but it was nice that since it was just the two of us, we took the opportunity to do it together. And I answered the same questions alongside Anik, and it was the first step in me kind of taking greater stock of my career. I had been so focused on just learning. I mean, I started working with Anik maybe a year out of college, and it was like my first kind of really high level experience post graduation. And so again, I was just focused on learning. I hadn't really taken stock, and that was the first time I'd done it with, the exercises through they're working with Nancy.
So I'd love to jump in at this point to add that, while that's a typical kind of engagement for me, what quickly came to light or came right up to the surface was the question of how women's work in architecture is similarly of merit and benefit and has accomplished great things alongside men's work, but it's been so hard to see it because it hasn't been presented in equal measure in the media, or it isn't discussed in equal measure. And as a group, we quickly came to the conclusion that we wanted to do something collectively to address that. And, therein, there's a lot more to say about it, but therein was the birth of our mentoring seminar series, because we wanted to create a venue in which young women architects could learn some of the things quickly through mentorship that we had only learned through practice in a period of time that was much longer. And, there's a lot more to say about it, and I'll stop and let Anik and Angelique jump in. But we were very deliberately trying to address that and create what I like to think of as the old girls network.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see the need for it. And I think most women who work in architecture and other fields that are predominantly male, definitely appreciate this kind of group. So, I mean, how did you start like the Women in Architecture mentoring group, but how long has it been going on for?
At the exit interview with Nancy and Angelique and I, the last meeting we had, Nancy asked, well, what do you want to do next? And my answer was, after reading an article in the New York Times called Where Are All the Female Architects?, which created a lot of anger by all the women in architecture who already felt invisible. And here was a major publication that has eyes all around the world and in all fields saying that architects were non-existent who were women. So it was a very upsetting article in the throes of feeling invisible in my career myself. Yet we, having been in architecture for decades, know so many women. Nancy, especially, she coaches and works in business development consulting for creative firms. She has a roster of women who have hired her in the past to kind of articulate what they can do and their value to find a path forward. And, whether it's a niche work or more substantial public works, she helps them articulate their value. But, knowing so many women in my generation that I went to school with or who were my mentors in architecture who were invisible, we thought, well, how can we take women who are senior and professionals who are already out there in person, who aren't deceased like some people, and have them meet younger professionals. If you can't see it, you can't be it.
I'd love to jump in again here. So to be clear, I work with men and women. And in fact, I probably work with more men than women. But as I recall, I feel like I almost dared Anik and Angelique to do what we're doing, which is to start some sort of endeavor that was going to support people, because we knew that, complaining about something or, identifying something was only part of the battle. And we also all were strong believers in the fact that the power of telling your story is so important and transformational. And we wanted to make the stories of the really accomplished women architects we knew broadly available to a group of young women architects so that they could then be both inspired by those examples, but also begin to see themselves in roles that were maybe described slightly differently than men's roles in practice. Or so that as many women could see themselves in as many different roles as seemed relevant to their aspirations and dreams. And, we're not creating this information, we're just making it visible. And together, we know such a wonderful community of architects, men and women. Although we focus our efforts on the women's stories, we make it really clear that both men and women are welcome to attend, but we also make it clear that, guys, we're not dealing with your issues. You're welcome to join us. And insofar as these issues pertain to you, fantastic. But, please don't ask us to focus on your needs, because that's not what we're here for. But it really is about allowing these stories to be told.
And we started simply. I mean, just as Anik and Nancy said, we just reached out to the women that were already in our network, our mentors, our peers, And we thought, hey, we're all, working and practicing. And so, how do we make this easy for women architects to participate in? And
Yep.
we started out, and the idea was for it to be conversational, for it to be accessible, for it to reach incoming practitioners, which is, where we started, although it's expanded well beyond incoming practitioners in their kind of early end years of architectural education into the first 5 years of their practice, of their careers. But connecting, whether that was with institutions, with women that were teaching, women practitioners that were teaching, with the young women working in their firms. So inviting the mentors that we all already knew to then invite the young women that they know, and just simply make it easy in that way. What was already quite accessible to us. And that was our very first season back in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, and we were in person, and we were hosting actually at each mentor's office. They were gracious enough to host us, which was really quite pleasant because you could get to see them in their environment and see the different scale of their firms and the different things they worked on. Again, kind of highlighting different ways of practicing, different offices, different cultures. And that was wonderful until the pandemic hit and we went virtual. But and that had its own, life. And I'm happy to let Anik or Nancy chime into how that kind of shifted what we offer. The
Yep.
culture of what we, the spirit of what we offer is the same, but the format is different. And there were kind of pros to going in the virtual direction during the pandemic as well.
I'd
Yeah.
like to add just one quick thing about that, which is that, we, at the time, there were fewer of these types of programs. It's hard to
Yep.
remember 6 years ago. And in addition to reaching out to people that we knew, we reached out to some people that we didn't know, like Francis Hall's band. And we purposefully designed our approach to make it easy for everyone to say yes, because it wasn't going to create a huge workload or impinge upon their
Yep.
time in a really burdensome way. And, Francis Hall's band is the perfect example because none of us knew her. And yet we reached out, and literally within 10 minutes of sending the email, there was this, yes, absolutely, sign me up.
Mm.
And, it was so gratifying to reach out to people, known and unknown, and be met
Yeah.
with such enthusiasm to say, absolutely, this is a great thing. I want to be a part of it.
I was going to ask, what kind of reactions were you getting? Like, did you hear back from people who said, "Oh, finally, this is like this is a group that I've been waiting for," or did you get any pushback or anyone who said, I'm not interested"?
No, absolutely
Oh,
not.
not
Zero.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Everyone
really says something.
And everyone remarked during the programs, during the sessions themselves, how they were lacking this very program when they were early in their careers. Like it was filling a void that had, a long-term void. And they were very grateful to participate, but also to meet their own colleagues in the process. And so often we would invite 2 or 3 women who didn't even know each other as mentors, and they connected through the program too. So Nancy, talking about growing a community.
It's probably a good time to describe what the program is actually like and what we
Yes,
asked
please.
of people, because it's so simple. What we asked was 2 women side by side to come and speak for 20 minutes. And since we went virtual, they didn't have to go anywhere, to speak for 20 minutes about literally anything they wanted to speak about that they considered to be of relevance to the shape and the trajectory of their career. And it could be personal or professional, anything really. And then to participate in an open discussion for the remaining hour and some about the things that had come up in the 2 presentations. And,
So just to break it down, you have the seasoned architects, the people who, the women who have been in practice for a while. You also have women who are starting out, either just graduating at the beginning of their career. So you're mixing these 2 people together.
yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. And 2 speakers, each one speaks for 15 or 20 minutes. And then everybody is welcome to have a question and answer period or further the discussion on any of the things that have been brought up. And that's how it's unfolded over the years.
Yeah, since we've had all of these sessions on Zoom, we have recordings of every single one and have a YouTube channel that we can share links to people who are interested, as it's a safe space and people talk about various sensitive issues. Sometimes we don't want to make this a public platform, so we do send links to people who are interested to hear about people that they are curious about, or about the session itself, because the sessions often we ask, you know, those formative questions that Nancy mentioned, but the answers are often very interesting to the registrants. Like, how do you balance your creative aspirations with the real world needs of your day-to-day job? How do you balance life and work, or personal matters, or how do you make yourself heard? How do you make your own opportunities? These are questions that most people are asking themselves, and I'm curious to hear others talk about, to see if there is a way forward, or something that they haven't really thought about before. And learning from your peers is a very powerful way to find a path forward.
Well, and even more, you know, literally, what if you want to have a baby? How is that going to impact the progress of your career if you're working for a big firm or working on your own, or what other permutations? Or, you know, what if you just had a performance review that doesn't ring true to your own authentic knowledge of yourself, and someone else is making decisions about your future, and you're just like, wait a minute, this isn't right. How do you deal with that? Or, you know, things like that.
Yeah. Even
someone
hearing you talk about this, I'm thinking I can relate to every single one of these points that you're talking about. And I think it's so nice to hear from people. Like, at some point in my career, I started working with people who were like 10 years, 15 years younger than me, like, and particularly women. When I talk to them, I feel like I want to tell them, like, this thing that you're going through, I've been through it already, you know, I can relate. So it's not, you know, it's not just you, it's not unique, nothing's wrong with you. And I think it means so much to people to know that, right?
To the point of you being able to relate to it, I think one of the interesting things that we found is while we put this call out to incoming practitioners, we really got an overwhelming response from mid-career professionals that were experiencing shifts or similar questions that you realize you're not just experiencing at the outset of your career, but now, 10, 15 years, 7 to 15 years in, now that you have a bit more knowledge, you're still kind of answering the same questions, but in a different way. And so the community expanded beyond just between these kind of two poles, but now there's also this middle section that we really get a lot of engagement from as well, because they, benefit from being able to answer these questions, and also, not just have these questions answered, but they contribute to the conversation with what experience they have that feeds kind of, the more seasoned architects as well as the incoming practitioners. So it's a good kind of mix.
I want to add that, the first year, because we were in person for 4 out of our 5 scheduled sessions, unfortunately, we didn't capture those sessions. It was just a different time and a different format. But, we had some amazing people come and speak. The first session kickoff was Anik alongside Joan Krevelin of BKSK. And the final session, I spoke alongside Claire Weiss. These are very accomplished women who were speaking alongside us. And somewhere in between, a dear friend of mine, Barbara Spandorf, spoke. And she had been a specialty theater design architect who lost her job in the Great Recession and shifted her focus and became someone working in the public sector for the DDC and then for the CUNY system.
Oh, CUNY, yeah.
And, to just have a conversation with someone about, your career might shift and you might have a totally different focus in the type of work you do. And here's why you might want to do that, and what some of the advantages are of doing that, and what some of the differences are. And, things that until you've considered what it's like to work in the public sector, and you've never worked in the public sector before, you would have no idea how that's going to change your life or change your focus. So it was really an opportunity to present these alternative options to people taking the early steps in their careers.
Yeah. I'd love to ask you, since like a big part of this is about visibility of women in the industry and female architects. For one thing, have you noticed that any improvement in that in the last, I don't know, 10 years? And Also, have you managed to raise the visibility of your mentorship group? And like, how have you gone about trying to get people to find it and, you know, to join? Apart from the cold calling kind of aspect.
I would say through doing this, we've learned of a lot more organizations that are doing similar work, whether that is, you know, the AIA New York's Women in Architecture Committee or architects or, you know, Madam Architect publications that focus on, you know, this women in architecture or Move Over Bob. We have learned about, you know, other organizations that are equally or similarly focused on, you know, promoting women and their work within the field. And it's been interesting that through it's, you know, you don't, it feels like there's a complete void until you get out there and start doing it. And then you realize that you've unearthed all of these other, you know, parallel organizations that for many of them, we've been able to support one another, right? We do similar work, but we do it a bit differently and kind of corner the market, if you want to call it that, in a different way. So I'll start there and allow, Nancy and Amy to chime in.
Yeah, I would love to add here that, you know, it's like we've tapped a vein. And from the outset, we have never considered ourselves to be the experts with the last word. We consider ourselves to have developed a model that's useful. And we have always, together, the three of us, wanted to spread that model and let other people take it and adapt it, but most importantly, repeat it so that there are large groups of women all over the place that have access to the women who've come before them to talk about the things that make their careers more dynamic and productive and satisfying. But shifting gears a little bit, somewhere in, I think, the second or third season, collectively, we had this realization that while we were thinking we were mentoring, what we are doing is not just mentoring, but we're also championing the women that have come before us in service of making their work visible. Because we know this work is there. We know these women are producing it. We know how wonderful the work is. And so, you know, this groundswell, this chatter starts in the background and it seeps out into the world and people become aware that this is going on. And in that, they become aware of the work. And we've always been very focused on making sure the work is seen and discussed and a part of the overall cultural narrative as much as anyone else's work.
Yeah.
Yep.
This sounds like where you should be picking up.
Yeah, the program really spreads organically because, you know, just illustrating the power of your network. As Nancy had coached us during our sessions, private sessions with her, and kind of recognizing who our cheerleaders are, our allies, our you know, the people who you already know is the source of the future people that you will meet, and that network will grow organically. And we've seen that in the program from the first season of inviting women who have their own firms or women who teach or who are involved in institutions, you know, in our schools of architecture. They have access to the whole roster of student bodies. So in our first few seasons, we made a lot of contacts with senior women who had a network of younger people they could tell about the program.
Yeah.
Posters would go up in schools, and we had a lot of students join. And that grew organically because those students knew each other and told each other about us. And similarly, women who presented in the sessions told their colleagues or referred their colleagues to us. And so that network grew on its own. And like Angelique is saying too, now that we know other organizations that are allied in the same way, we either invite them to speak with us or we're invited to speak as a panel with their community. So we're seeing that community grow, but also, you know, kudos to Angelique, the tech whiz of all of us through technology.
Brains.
Yeah.
The brains of the operation.
That's right. You know, having been able to explode virtually meant that we had a much wider reach. So we have, I think, of over 40 states, people in 40
Yep.
states who join
Wow.
us in sessions, and abroad as well. We've had people from England, from Canada, from
Singapore.
Kenya, from South America,
from
from
Africa.
India, from just about every continent, I think,
Um,
except for Antarctica at this point. All right.
And is your aim to grow further? I mean, like, do you hope that people will, you know, for example, hear this, see this, and say, "Oh, I know some people who might be interested. Let me pass the link on." Is that, you know, is the idea that you'd like to
Absolutely.
grow exponentially?
so
No, I
I would
think
say,
it
oh, go ahead.
depends.
I would say it isn't growth for the sake of growth, but rather, things evolve. And I would predict that as we are in a period of uncertainty and there may be a downturn in building activity, quite likely, I predict we're going to have an upsurge of attendance because people are going to have more time. And they're also
Yeah.
going to be asking themselves questions about, how do I secure my own career in the context of a very dynamic and unpredictable economy that impacts my industry in ways that are somewhat understood, but in some ways not understood. How do I do this?
Yeah.
And that's the perfect time to be in conversation with a broader number of people, even if only for solidarity, but also because those are the conversations that help you find your way into the future.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'd say growth in terms of access to our programming, not necessarily that we can, produce more.
We're
But
three
Yeah.
yeah,
people. We're kind of
yeah,
maxed out.
exactly.
3 people with full-time jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you guys have learnt? Maybe like a couple of the top things that you feel like you've learnt from these mentoring sessions.
Oh, there's so many. Gosh.
It's a big list. I mean, we were talking about, I think that you put some really interesting points beforehand that I'd love to like dive into each of them, but maybe one of the big ones it like is like how to continue to grow professionally and how to change your career midway. Because I think this is something that I've come across in my career, and lots of other colleagues and friends have all, I've been doing this for 5 years, for 10 years, and actually this is not exactly what I want to do. How do I shift without starting again? I mean, is that something that any of you can speak to?
Angelique, I think you're well positioned to answer that, given what you learned during the sessions with a few mentors who've become your collaborators.
And
For
I'd like to
sure.
take it on
Yeah.
after Angelique as well.
Yeah. So this started, I was actually still taking my licensing exams when we started mentorship for women in architecture. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me when I finally got licensed and I was starting to think about what I wanted to do next, what I maybe wanted to do differently, what I was loving, what I wanted to change. It was a great opportunity to listen to the stories of other women in various areas of the field, doing different things, working differently, whether that was writing, which maybe was an interest of mine, or connections to development, to fashion, just to working different ways, different firms, just wondering what was next for myself. So just hearing all of those stories was wonderful. One of our mentors, I believe, then became the coach that I ended up hiring to help me, figure out what I wanted to do next once I actually had my license. And so I'd started the business right in the middle of all of this, and there were so many conversations and things that I was hearing and critical questions, just to kind of help me filter through how I was thinking about my career and what I wanted to do next before I could, be able to clearly draft a statement that said, you know what, this is what I want to do. And so I want to create a firm that now focuses exclusively, or primarily, I should say, on, preservation, sustainability, and how that can, how that is also, an equal merit development, not just building new, but, adaptive reuse being a valid
Yeah.
form of development, and that being what I really wanted to do next. So yeah, I think it was just being in conversation with different women doing different things and being inspired by them, and kind of asking myself them sparking questions in me that I needed to answer to figure out what I wanted to do next.
But specifically with Karen Payson, do you want to
Oh yeah.
talk about?
So Yeah, Karen Payson gave me an amazing bit of advice, just in terms of, starting out as a small practice, how to potentially grow, and just Karen Payson, actually, I would say Lissa So as well, and her partner Anya Ramirez, about, whether or not to go with NWBE, which, help them to grow their firm, or partner with larger firms on larger projects that I otherwise wouldn't have access to, right? If you have something
Yeah.
that they need and a skill set that they need, how can you then partner with larger firms to do something at a larger scale that you wouldn't be able to take on your own? And that was great advice that I got from Karen Payson. And so, yeah, the mentors in the group have kind of, for one reason or another, period or another, I've reached out to kind of assist me in figuring out a new business, in addition to,
Yeah.
Anik also, right? I'm doing this for the first time. What do I need? What, all of it is very new.
Yeah.
So kind of pulling from all of these resources have been very helpful in kind of navigating these first years of having my own practice.
That's great.
So I'd like to take that in a different direction to shed yet more light on it, which is that, regardless of gender, we all have those moments in our career where you have a conversation or you have a project or something happens. And whether you realize it at the time or not, it absolutely changes the direction of our career and what we then go on to do in the future. And I had that moment in my career. Angelique, you've just described it. You've probably had that moment. Anik, I imagine you've had it too. Michelle, you've probably had it. We've all had it. I'm trained as an architect. I do not practice, and I have not practiced since 1997. But, it's something that happened that made those changes a reality. So here's my point. We are trying to reach out to women in advance to create the opportunity to catalyze something happening. And we don't know
Yep.
what it is that we're trying to make happen. We're just trying to reach out in advance so that there's a very fluid and rich conversation going on at all times that enables this enormous amount of information to be flowing in a way
Yeah.
that's going to support growth and excitement and satisfaction and all of the things that allow you to build a really dynamic and productive career.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
there was a session with Frances Hosband, in fact. Nancy is talking about how to recognize things that are right in front of your nose. And if you know how to look, basically, you won't let those opportunities go, vanish. So Frances Hosband had a session where she said, you absolutely cannot have your head in the clouds. Don't pursue dreams. Look down on earth. Look at what's right in front of you, because something wonderful might happen. And if you're looking up in the clouds dreaming about something else, that opportunity might just pass you by.
Yeah.
It's a very prescient comment. How many of us always think about plan A, but plan B might be even more valuable or long term? Who knows? Like, let's discount that.
Hearing you say that, Anik, reminds me of yet another speaker, Elizabeth O'Donnell, who I really didn't know very well before she spoke. And I still don't know her all that well, but here's the point. She spoke about a project that her involvement in that project was begun like in her 30s or maybe her 20s. And it was this incredibly dynamic project for what became the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial on Roosevelt Island, which was a Lou Kahn project that had never been carried forward into construction. And of course, now 30 years after the fact, it got built. And why do I bring it up? Well, it was so exciting to hear her describe how this dream from when she was very young, 30 years later, had a life. And because she had been involved in it 30 years before, she was able to participate in the realization of it 30 years later, which was, I don't know, Anik, maybe you know more about this than I do. I only remember the most basic details, but it was so exciting to see that, yes, don't keep your head in the clouds and rely only on the dreams, but keep those dreams alive, because sometimes the opportunity to fulfill those dreams walks right by you 30 years later.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really incredible. I think that I guess one of the main points is really like being deliberate about your career path, right? Like understanding that, because I think I know a lot of people, and I've definitely gone through this too, where you're in a career and it's moving, but it's not necessarily, you didn't necessarily feel like you chose it, right? And to understand that there is something else you can pivot to, but to know that, because sometimes when when you're in a job and there's maybe like a set path that you're going to do this, then you're going to, progress to this and progress to this. And that doesn't excite you or interest you. You don't know what else is available. And I guess one of the really great things about the visibility of your group is that you're letting people know there are all of these other options that you could choose. Does that sound true?
Yes, very much so. There are a lot of mentees who come on the program and speak and ask these very questions. How I know what I want. How can I be deliberate about going for it? What are the ways in which I can make those manifest themselves? And a lot of times the answer is to just speak up, say it
Mm-hmm.
out loud, tell somebody, because
Ask.
how would anyone know? And most likely that person who's at the other end of the conversation would be more than willing to help you get there. And if they can't, they might know someone who could help you get there. But the important thing is saying it out loud and saying it. How do
Yeah.
you get a promotion at work if you're not asking? How do you
Yeah.
get into a different kind of role at work that you may not really think you're ever going to get unless you go and ask for it? How would the principal of the firm even know that your aspirations would like you to fill a role that might be lacking in the firm? Who knows? Like, take a chance, take a risk. What do you have to lose?
Yeah.
And similarly, we help people figure out how to ask the questions to get the
Yeah.
answers they need. Because you don't
That's
know
good.
how to do that right out of the gate.
Yeah, it's not everyone's personality, I think, is it? Like, I think some people are more forthright and outspoken and are not maybe not shy, or you're not afraid to speak up. And there are a lot of people who don't know the best way to do it because it's not natural to them, but they maybe just, have just as valid a thing to say and don't know how to say it out. So I guess that must be really helpful
There,
to
Yeah,
know.
that's an interesting point. I think we've also encountered and recently heard from, I mean, I can't even just say recently, but we've noticed some of our mentors have openly said things like, I'm an introvert, but, I've managed to have this successful and thriving career. I've figured out how to lead and how to lead a team and how to assert myself, but in my own way. It doesn't look the same way it does for, a more extroverted individual, but this is how I do it. And in addition to that, like in addition to us, volunteering our time and being accessible to mentees to help them ask those questions, we also ask that our mentors do the same. Again, and it's not a large time commitment, but we have devoted some time to outside of our sessions being able to answer some of those questions more directly, walk through, do some of these kind of acting some of these things out or working through. Certainly I know that I have with mentees, but I really brought that up to say, it's also interesting to hear just the stories of how introverted people have figured out how to lead and chart
Yeah.
a path for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine that being really helpful. There's one final topic that I'd love to talk about that we were talking about, I guess, before we started recording, which is, I guess, a really pertinent, thing that's like an inflection point at the moment, which is the architect industry, the building industry, going through this period of uncertainty with, like a looming recession. And Nancy, your sort of your practice, being able to help and consult with smaller firms and talk them through this kind of making business decisions. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what kind of things that
Sure.
you offer?
Sure. And thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure this will resonate with anyone who is educated in the practice of architecture. Never in your education does anybody really spend time discussing how it is that you're going to get work. They talk about the work that you're going to do and what a genius you're going to be in doing it and how important your ideas are and being the, genius auteur. But nobody says anything about operating in the context of the marketplace. And that's a huge disservice to the industry. And so it's almost like one has to take a step back and say, okay, here I am out in the world. What can I do to thrive in that world? And, yes, the uncertainty of the moment is dizzying at times or very concerning at times, but it can also be somewhat exhilarating in that we have a little more time to look into things that we don't usually have time to focus on, like, well, what do I want? And how do I put myself out there or shape the way I communicate to get it? Because there are very easily understood strategies to be developed that can help you get from point A to point B in a way that you might never have realized or thought about in the past. And so, this is a perfect time to take a step back with some of that time that is now available to us to think through, what do I want next? Or what do I want in the future? Or what slight change is going to make my professional life more satisfying or more stable or more viable in the context of X, Y, and Z that are going on? And, while this is pervasive throughout the industry with all architects, it's especially poignant in small practices because people typically initiate practice on their own because of an opportunity, not because they have a business plan and have thought out, what is the first step and what is the next step. And sometimes there's sort of outline of a business plan. I have to say, Angelique Pierre, right here on the screen, she engaged in these steps with a very clear plan, a very well thought out plan. Kudos to you, Angelique. But a little bit of insight with regard to the marketplace and your own way of approaching it is so profound and so powerful because we so rarely take that step to look in that direction.
And it's just relegated to architecture and engineering and construction industries. This could be applied to any business, really.
Yeah. And do you offer this kind of service for any business?
I do. I tend to offer it mostly in the building industry because I know the building industry. I've spent my entire career in the building industry. But occasionally there's an opportunity that comes up to work with someone who's in an adjacent field. And in the occasion when that is relevant, absolutely, I'm eager to do it. The thing I want to emphasize is that, taking a step back and asking yourself, what do I really want, is not something that we as a society put out there as a cultural message. And people get on a path and they're kind of in autopilot on that path, taking the next step and then the step after that. But, having an opportunity to reflect on the path and figure out deliberately what changes to the path are desirable is something we should all be doing anyway. We just have developed in such a way that we don't often do it. And doing this type of work on your practice. I like to draw the distinction between working on your business and working in your business. With working in your business being executing projects for clients for money, and working on your business being all the things that allow you to continue working in your business.
Yeah, that's really
We give short shrift to working on our business, no matter what our business is. So,
I mean, business development is such a big part of a business. I mean, that is like a full-time job for even medium-sized practices, right? So you're sort of describing how small practices and also people starting out as well, I suppose, as well as medium-sized practices, like how can they help the business development to grow their business?
Right. And, it's always good to be deliberate and thoughtful and strategic as you proceed. But, nobody emerges into practice with this knowledge. It's something that you work on and gain over time. And, just being deliberate about anything and everything is a very liberating way to be in the world.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to add about what services you offer and something that you've helped me out with, Nancy, is that in addition to asking those questions about what you want, is also being able to recognize what opportunities are available to you that maybe you don't even see. So having that outside lens of like, actually, you know what, there are these 2, 3 things that are right under your nose that you maybe haven't explored or not explored to their, fullest capability that could really change things.
Yeah.
And having you say that, or having someone, like yourself, Nancy, help with that is really valuable.
Well, thank you. And, I want to direct us away from doing the Nancy show because it just doesn't feel right. But, it's
Yeah.
a dynamic that happens in any conversation at any time. Having a conversation with someone who's new to the discourse or who's just not you and is therefore objective about what you're thinking about is going to shift your thinking in a positive way
For sure.
all the time, every single time. So, I always like to, ask people directly, what do you need? How can I help you? What's the next thing that you're trying to accomplish, and what support is going to make that easier? So I'd like to turn it back to all of you, like starting with Anik. What's next for you? What do you need?
Well, I have to dig up my notes from when you consulted with me because I put them in a file and I haven't looked at them. I feel like this is the time to bring them back out and to recap the things that I haven't done since you consulted with me. But I wanted to bring it back to the mentorship program. In a similar way, we had a mentee who attended some of our sessions, and out of the blue, she emailed us and said she had joined a new firm a few years later. And she wanted to create a session with us in her firm because she had decided to step up and become involved in creating a community within her firm to answer the questions within the firm and to create events and bring in outside people to talk to the employees there. And basically she credited us for the things she learned on our program to be able to step up and ask for that role in a new firm she had just joined. And we were the first people to be invited to the first event and to tell that story. It was really wonderful. And you see, the impact that the program had on someone who had an idea who may not have otherwise acted on it, but we gave her the tools to have the confidence, or, she found the tools. I wouldn't say we gave them to her because maybe we made them visible, but to have,
we all have conversations like this every day, and we've all had experiences where someone has said something and it just resonated in the right way at the right moment. And then you cross paths with that person, X years down the line, and you say to them, I don't know if you realize, but on such and such day, you said this to me and it had this impact in my life. And inevitably, the person you say that to is like, really? I had no idea. And it's such an exciting and delicious moment when someone says, I heard you say this thing 8 years ago, and it changed the way I think about all these other things, which in turn changed my life. I've certainly had that experience where I've said that to somebody, do you realize you said this to me?
I love that. I think that's amazing. I think that must be one of the most rewarding parts of, well, like the mentoring as well as like, starting the group. And I think it's really powerful. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on to this podcast and describe what you do and describe all the different kind of elements to the group. I'm going to put a link to the mentorship program. So if anyone is interested or knows someone who's interested, they can look it up, get in touch. I'd love well, there's a lot more things I'd love to talk to you about, and maybe in like a few weeks or a couple of months, if you guys want to come back on the podcast, it would be so interesting to follow up and maybe even deep dive into one or two of the topics that we've talked about. Just to wrap it up, is there I'm going to go around one bit of advice that maybe you'd give someone who's quite starting out in the architecture practice? Maybe Angelique, you could start.
Oh, sure. Ooh, one bit of advice. I guess this is kind of low-hanging fruit. Find mentors.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the most important things that you can do. And I would also say, look up from your work sooner than later. I think that's one thing I wish I had realized a bit sooner. And while it is equally as important to be diligent and great at what you do. It is also equally important to develop really great relationships with people and have mentors to ask questions about, your career and what possibilities there are, or just to kind of have in your corner as you're navigating your career. Do that sooner than later.
Yeah, that's great. And Anik, any advice?
I would say, think about the things that you love and embrace them. Don't ever think that your interest, for example, in skiing or music or biking is incompatible with your career. Maybe that would be a source of future opportunities, or it might, create links with people that you might not normally link with, and grow your community and grow your opportunities. I often have discussions with younger incoming practitioners who are afraid of who they are. They think they have to subdue and they have to fit themselves in a neat little box and wear the right clothes and say the right things and act a certain way. But actually, that's counterproductive. If they act who they are as their own people, I think they're much more likely to be noticed and to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. And Nancy, anything from you?
Yeah, so I feel like what I'm about to say is of a piece with what has just been said by both Anik and Angelique. So we often lose sight of the fact that architecture is a service industry. We are a service profession. And what does that mean? Well, that means that the services we provide are always for a client. And that is to say that we should never lose sight of the fact that everything we do should be considered in relationship to who we're doing it for, who we're doing it with, and why we're doing it. And I think so much of our education is narrow in that we focus on the ideas in our own mind and what we think about them, and do what my friend Carol Dosher likes to refer to as the me, or the we show. But in reality, it's not about me, and it's not about we. Well, it is about we in how we relate to the world that we live in and the clients that we serve. And so, if everything is looked at through the lens of relationship, the potential is somewhat limitless, because the people in those relationships, it's a vast number of people. I could go on and not get anywhere else, so I'll kind of leave it at that.
Well, Carol calls it the you show, right?
Yeah.
She calls it the we show.
Oh, we show, yeah.
It sounds like you have such an amazing roster of people to learn from and be inspired by. So I'm definitely interested in this mentorship group. I watched some of the videos of the sessions that you had up on YouTube, and I mean, it was fascinating, really great. So I definitely, anyone listening and watching, want to go and check it out. I'll put the links in there. And thank you so much, Nancy, Anik, Angelique. It's been a really wonderful conversation and great to chat to you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much to Nancy, Anik, and Angelique for coming on the podcast. That was a really great episode. So much amazing insight and so much amazing resources from three really seasoned, incredible women. And if you know any women who are architects, work in architecture or even the building industry in any way, please send this to them, and I think that they might find it interesting. And go and check out Mentorship for Women in Architecture. Their website is womeninarchitecture.net. I'm going to put these links up. And thanks for listening to the podcast. Please share with anyone that you think might find it interesting, and go back and listen to previous episodes. We have a lot of great ones. I'm taking a little bit of a break, and I'll come back shortly with another great episode. And until then, see you next time. Bye.